The cyclone had lifted the two-storied house up off these stumps and dropped it back down again. And of course, it didn't drop exactly on the stumps. And these people had, because they were afraid their house might get blown down, they'd actually gone underneath it. And the house came down on top of them.
There is rarely a life untouched by hardship or challenge. On this podcast, we invite our guests to share their very personal stories. We harness the wisdom and resilience of our guests, which has shaped who they are today.
Carl Rogers said, "That which is most personal is in fact most universal." Together we'll be inspired to embrace the resilience in our own stories and to gain strength in the face of adversity and have a few laughs along the way.
Hi, I'm Donna.
And I'm Di. We are the Double Ds and welcome to the Discovery Diaries.
We acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the traditional custodians of the land on which we are recording this podcast. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and acknowledge their spiritual connection to family and storytelling.
Both Donna and Di were born here on these lands. We are grateful to draw on the culture of telling and sharing stories, and we hope that you will draw inspiration from the stories that are shared here.
Today's episode is with Laurence Brown, also known as Laurie Brown. He was born in Scotland and travelled to Perth in Western Australia when he was 17 years old in 1952. A couple of weeks later, after he arrived, he went up to the northwest of Western Australia, several thousand kilometres away, and he worked there in a variety of jobs. Laurie has had various careers throughout his life, and he worked for decades in the Western Australian Public Service. Laurie now lives in Adelaide in South Australia, where he has been retired for many years, and he enjoys different activities in his retirement, including weekly drawing classes. So Laurie's long life, we couldn't talk about everything in this episode, but we did talk about a few key moments and a few key stories about life back in the 60s and 70s in the northwest of Western Australia. And I hope you enjoy some of these stories and hearing Laurie's life adventures as much as we did.
So welcome, Laurence. And I'm noticing you wearing a lovely tartan, maybe not tartan jacket. Where's your heritage, Laurence?
Wardy.
Oh, Wardy, yeah.
It's near Granton.
I know exactly where you are.
Do you?
I do indeed.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, welcome, Laurence. It's lovely to have you with us. And your lovely jacket is reminding me of the motherland.
Oh, very pleased you're impressed with it.
So, Di, I know Laurie because we worked together for a very long period. And Laurie, I don't know if you remember, but we shared an office. It wasn't really an office. It was an area where we both sat together. And I was a graduate and you were there as well. And I do remember that our boss at the time came in one day and he said, "Laurie, today's the day. You've got to turn that computer on and learn how to use it." Do you remember that?
Well, I don't actually, but I know I resisted.
Yes, and so that's how long I've known Laurie. It was back in the days when computers were just coming in, so that shows how old both of us are. But, so we shared an office for a long time, and we also have done some orienteering type activities together as well. So it's great to see you again, Laurie. Laurie is visiting at the moment over from Adelaide. Yes. So, Laurie, I know that you came to Australia in 1952?
Yes.
And you came over on a ship from Scotland, but you only stayed in Perth for a couple of weeks and then you ended up in Broome, is that right?
No, I ended up firstly in Marble Bar and in a tin mine at a place called Nullarbubblika, which was about 50 miles out of Marble Bar.
Okay, and then so tell us about how you ended up in Broome, which is in the far northwest of Western Australia.
Well, when I was 11 years old, my father, who was the head waiter in a 5-star hotel, shot through with a 16-year-old girl, and he was 47. And my mother had a really tough time. There was my two brothers were at sea. one was in the Merchant Marine, the other one was in the Royal Navy. And if it wasn't for the few pounds that they could, on occasion, send home, there was no money.
No.
My mother did get a job later as a barmaid. She'd been a waitress before she got married.
So was it just a sense that there was no money about, you needed to make some money and that was an opportunity that you could take?
No. I was only 11 years old then when that happened. And when I was about 15, my mother remarried somebody who was one of her boyfriends before, when she was in her teens or something. This guy's wife had died. He had a son who was about 18 or something. And so he took my sister and I, and my mother married him. But he didn't have much time for me. But he organised and arranged for me to come to Australia and start an apprenticeship with the West Australian Government Railways as an electrical fitter. He was an electrical engineer, actually, and he worked in Liverpool for the Mersey Docks and Harbour Board. But he didn't have any time for me at all. So it was all arranged for me to come to. But when I arrived in Fremantle, I arrived on the SS Maloja, Maloja, it's pronounced Maloja. It was a P&O ship. It got broken up 2 or 3 years after the trip I did. It arrived in Fremantle on the 1st of September 1952, and 1st of August, beg your pardon, and I just turned 17 then. And when I fronted up to the Midland Railways workshop, they said, "Sorry, son, we're not putting on any apprentices at the moment because all our metal workers, all our fitters and turners are out on strike." I said, "Well, it's all arranged for me." He said, "I know that." I said, "I've got 5 shillings in my pocket and I've got no place to stay." Oh, he said, "Hang on a minute, wait there for a while." And away he went, and he come back and he said, "We've arranged for accommodation on a job for you. And when the strike's over, you can start your apprenticeship."
Right.
And the job was a yardman in the Midland Junction Hotel. And I had a room to sleep in and meals.
Right.
And when I wasn't chopping the firewood for the kitchen, I was in the bar chipping the ice, freeing up the ice around the copper coils to keep the beer cold. They never had refrigeration.
No, of course, right, yeah.
And when I wasn't doing that, I was playing darts.
Perfecting your skills.
And that's where I met these guys after a couple of weeks who had come down from Marble Bar.
Right.
And I said, "Any chance of a job in Marble Bar in the tin mine?" They said, "Yeah, go and see the boss. He's in the Savoy Hotel in Hay Street."
Do you remember, Laurence, what that was like as a 17-year-old or something to come from Scotland to one of the hottest places in Australia?
It was a big adventure.
Okay.
My whole early life was a big adventure. Yeah.
Well, that's a great way to describe it.
And I worked in the Marble Bar Battery, the Bamboo Creek Battery, and the Nullagoyne 20-mile battery. And while I was in Nullagoyne, I met some guys in the pub there, and I was offered a job in the Blue Speck mine, which was just out of Nullagoyne also, and I got a job there. And I worked in the treatment plant of a gold and antimony mine there.
How old were you when you went to Broome?
I was 19.
19, so
About
not
19.
a couple of years later.
Yeah, well, it was, yes, yeah.
So Laurie,
I might have been actually not quite 19.
so could you tell us, because you told me about you had a letter of introduction.
Yes, when I left the Blue Speck mine, the manager said, "Where are you heading?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going up to Darwin, but I'm going to stop off into Broome because I remember reading a book when I was about 14 about the pearling."
Oh, yes.
And I thought it was quite interesting. So he said, "Oh, if you're going to stay in Broome, I'll give you a letter of introduction." And I never thought too much about that. I didn't realise, in fact, what a letter of introduction was, to be quite honest. And anyway, I stuck it in my swag and away I went.
So you said, Laurie, at that time everyone had a swag?
Yes.
That's how everyone travelled, yes?
Yeah, you had your...
so what is a swag for people that don't know?
A pillow, mattress, your change of clothing, but maybe a change of underwear and a couple of pairs of underwear or something, and another pair of jeans or something, and a couple of shirts. And it was all wrapped up in a Burkmai canvas and with a strap or a rope around it, and you just carry it.
That was all you needed.
Yeah. And you roll it out and sleep wherever you were.
And that's where Laurie rolled up his letter of introduction into there as well.
Yeah.
And so then what happened when you arrived in Broome?
Well, I went into Marble Bar and then I got on the plane. It was a DC-3 and you had to pay the pilot at the gangplank. There was a sort of a ladder going up into the plane and you paid him and he stuck it in his pocket and you got on the plane.
None of these F-post machines.
Things have changed since then.
Yeah. And I lobbed in Broome and I got a taxi to one of the hotels, the Governor Broome Hotel, and I stayed there. The Governor Broome Hotel was a series of bungalows for the accommodation and large bungalows and a big shed for the bar. At one end was a U-shaped bar against one wall, and there was a veranda on the front and side, and the rest of the hall, the shed was a long hall with a piano down the end, and they used to have dances and.
So how long had you been in Broome, Laurie, when you said that you were approached by the police?
The police.
Tell us about that.
Around about 10 days, I think
10 days.
it was.
And just tell us about what happened when the police approached you.
Well, I was sitting on the veranda of the bar having a drink of something, and the police came up to me and said, "What's your name?" And I said, you know my name. I've been here for a few days. And I see you checking the register of it. None of your cheeks, son. None of your lips, son. And I was sort of knocked back in my seat a bit. And I said, well, my name's Laurence Brown. And he said, I think it's time you moved on.
Oh.
And I said, why? I'm a guest here in the hotel. I'm paying my way, and move on. I don't want to see you in here within a couple of days, or words to that effect.
Yeah.
And away they went. So it suddenly dawned on me that I had a letter of introduction to somebody I'd never taken much notice of before, and it was to Sam Mayle. And Sam Mayle was the owner of Streeter and Mayle's general store, and he also had 3 or 4 pearling luggers.
Oh, yes.
And he used to build pearling luggers, in fact, on the foreshore next to his store. So I took my letter down there and went into the reception and said, I've got a letter here of introduction to Mr. Mayle. And the reception said, take a seat and I'll be with you in a minute. So she went and took the letter away, and a few minutes later, Sam Mailback comes bouncing out. "Laurie," he said, "John Lay says some very nice things about you." He said, "It's a pleasure to meet you." And he said, "Where are you staying?" And I said, "The Governor Broome." "Oh," he said, "that's Ralph Haycock's pub." I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I know Ralph." He said, "Would you like to stay in Broome for a while?" I said, "Well, I can't. I've been told to leave. The police have told me just yesterday to leave town." "Oh," he said, "don't worry about that." He said, "I'll fix that."
Oh.
And he said, "I'll get in touch with Ralph." And he said, "We'll get you a job and you can stay at the pub."
So I've got so many questions, Laurence. Did you find out why the police were trying to move you on?
Yeah, well, it wasn't until years later that I'd suddenly dawned. I never asked, but I realised afterwards that all the labour in Broome, all the labour on the luggers, and all the workers dealing with the pearl shell that was coming in to be sorted and packed and cleaned and ready for shipping to Europe or wherever they shipped it, was all indentured labour. And it was all, they were paid a pittance. And they didn't want outsiders coming into the town and usurping the conditions. The pearling masters, there was probably half a dozen pearling masters that owned luggers, and that was the main industry of the town. Other than the meatworks, there was a meatworks there.
Where were the workers who were getting these low wages? Where were they from, Laurie?
They were from Malaysia, Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia. Of course, it was still the Dutch East Indies then, and Hong Kong, Chinese, Singaporean, Malaysia, and quite a number of Aboriginals too.
And that's where Broome does have that real multicultural background, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so what did you end up doing with your boss that then became your boss? What kind of work did you end up being involved in?
The first job I got was whitewashing the roof of the Governor Broome buildings.
That would have kept your Scottish skin out in the sun.
Yeah.
I hope you had a hat.
I had a big hat on. and of course the glare off the existing whitewash.
Yeah.
And I did that for however long it took, a week or a couple of weeks maybe. And then I was made the manager of the cool drink and an ice factory.
Oh, that sounds like the best job in the world.
And I had
that would have been a good job in Broome.
Two Aboriginal offsiders, and I used to make up the syrups, and they would put a little cup, a couple of spoonfuls of the syrup in all the bottles, and then fill it up and put a crown seal on them.
And you also, at one stage, you owned a taxi in Broome, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, well, I had many jobs in Broome. Yeah,
Jack of all trades.
I had a taxi at the age of 21. But prior to that, I worked in Kennedy's General Store. My first wife worked for the manageress of the store, and she got me a job there when I didn't quite like the Iceworks job much.
Today's episode is brought to you by Impact Society. Impact Society is a company focused on helping everyday managers become world-changing leaders. They provide straightforward and stylish tools, training and content to elevate leadership skills and mindsets and to help leaders thrive in work and in life. Impact Society has a new product that's just coming out, which is called Random Acts of Leadership. And it's a pack of cards, like a pack of playing cards. And on each of the 52 cards is a different little act of leadership to do every day. So the hope with these cards is to inspire small daily acts of leadership with big impact. So each card has a leadership action to do, and then watch the positive ripple effects with your team. And they foster a culture of trust, openness and growth. The reason I really like these cards is they're something a little bit different. They're fun, they're easy, and they've got small actionable things to do every day. And they make fantastic gifts for the office as well. So for listeners of the Double D's podcast, there's a 20% discount on these leadership cards. You just need to go to impactsociety.co, and when you order the leadership cards, put in a discount code which is double D's, so DOUBLEDS, and then you'll get your 20% discount. And then when you receive the cards, let us know on Instagram in a message at Double D's Discovery Diaries on Instagram. Let us know any impacts and fun stories that you have with using these cards, and we look forward to you enjoying them and letting us know how they've positively impacted you. So, Laurie, I really love the story about how you became a ministerial appointee, which was a little bit later in 1961.
1960.
So can you share that story? Because that was a real turning point in your career, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, I sort of went broke in a taxi after about 18 months. It was multiple hiring in Broome, so you could bring however many people you could cram in your taxi, and it was 2 shillings to go anywhere in Broome. And it was... you could get 5 people in the taxi. And mostly there were 3 pubs in Broome, one at one end of the town, a couple of miles away from the furthest one in Chinatown, and one in the middle. And people used to go back and forth to the pubs. And on the way, you would pick somebody up going shopping or something. The shops were mainly in Chinatown, but there was a couple of other shops scattered around the town. And I went broke after because the girls wanted free rides after a while.
and you couldn't...
I couldn't handle it.
Well, the bank couldn't handle it.
Well, yeah. But I paid off my taxi in 12 months, one way or another. And thereafter, when I lost that, when I went broke on there, I was offered a job as a taxi driver in Derby.
Oh, okay, yes.
So
yes.
I moved over to Derby, which is about 100-odd miles away. And
yes, because that's when you became the ministerial appointee. It was in Derby, wasn't it?
It was in Derby.
Yes.
When I got there, the job fell through. Somebody else had already been engaged as a driver. So I applied for a job with the Public Works Department, and they took me on as a labourer, and I was digging trenches with another gang of Aborigines, and we were laying pipelines around.
And the Public Works Department was a government department that used to build all the infrastructure, wasn't it?
Yes. It was the Public Works Department in the Kimberleys was referred to as the Northwest branch of the Public Works Department.
My dad actually worked in the Public Works Department for a long time as well.
Right.
Yeah. So how did it come about this ministerial appointment?
After a while, I was digging trenches, and the truck driver left or something, and I was offered that job, which I took, and I was driving the truck and delivering people to and equipment to the different various jobs that were being done around Derby. And one of them was the maintenance of the timber jetty, which was an ongoing thing all the time. And one day there was a blue funnel ship in the SS Gorgon, and it was loading cattle to Singapore. And I happened to have to deliver some large galvanized bolts to the jetty gang So I drove down to the parking area near the jetty. And as I stopped the truck, I looked out the window and there was a Ford Fairlane or something of that size there. And I could see a big roll of notes on the front seat.
Right.
And I knew whose car it was because it was only one of those. It was a local stock and station agent, Bob Rowe's car. And there was this big roll of...
You're talking about money? You're talking about
yes,
dollar bills?
Pound notes.
Pounds, of course.
Yeah, back then.
This is in 61, it would have been by then. I'd been there about a year. I loaded up my wheelbarrow with the bolts to take down to the jetty, and I grabbed this money. People didn't lock their cars those days. I grabbed this money, and I knew he was down on the ship dealing with the shipment of the cattle. That was part of his agency's job. And I went up the gangplank, and there was an officer and another crew member there. And I said, "Is Mr. Rowe on board?" And the officer said, "Yes." I said, "I'd like to see him if it's possible." And he said, "Oh, no." He said, "He's in with the captain."
You're like, "I think he might want to see me."
Well, no, I said, "Well, will you give him that, please?" I found it on the front seat of his car, and I handed him the roll of notes. It was this big with a couple of lucky bands on it. About 2 or 3 weeks later, I happened to be at the back of his office loading some oxy and acetylene bottles to take back to the depot. And he came out of his office and he said, "G'day, Laurie." He knew me. And I said, "Did you get your money all right the other week?" And he said, "Yes." "Was that you that found it?" I said, "Yeah." I said, he said, "I took my daughter down to the ship with me, and when we left the car, I thought she had the money and she thought I had the money." And he said, and it was just left there.
Wow.
And how much money was it, Laurie?
I never opened it, but there must have been thousands. It was to pay for the shipment of the cattle. It must have been, I don't know.
About £7,000 or something?
Well, I think that figure was mentioned at one stage.
Well, I did a quick calculation knowing that you might tell us this story. If we were thinking about £7,000 in those days, we're probably talking over 200,000 in today's money. It's a lot of money.
Yes, it was.
Did you get tempted to take it, Laurie? You didn't get tempted to take it?
No, I never considered it.
Yeah.
I've worked on gold mines with the treatment. And one of the things I had to do was we had the corduroy tables, and the pounded rock used to wash over these tables. And every few hours, you would have to take the corduroy off, divert the floor to another table, take the corduroy off of this one and wash it.
Right.
And you could, in a 44-gallon drum, and you could go down the bottom of the drum and there's gold in your hand.
Yeah.
And it never dawned on me to...
So then what happened after that with this original story about the money?
Well, that was it. He said, "Thanks very much," and and away I went. I loaded the oxyacetylene bottles, and away I went. And I don't know, sometime after that, some weeks after that, the engineer Max Anderson came up to me. He said, "How would you like to be an engineering surveyor?" And I said, "I'll give it a go." And he said, "How was your schooling?" He said, "What maths?" I said, "I did geometry, algebra, geometry, trigonometry." But I said, I wasn't very interested and I wasn't very good at it. He said, "You'll do." And he put me with a young engineer, Tom Hirschfeld. And Tom later became a member of Parliament for one of the Hills electorates here. And I met him years later. I was doing some canvassing for another politician, and we happened to meet it.
So those were the days of the real apprenticeship. You learned from the master.
You couldn't learn. You couldn't do that today.
And you felt, Laurie, that one of the main reasons, probably behind the scenes, that you got offered that job was because of
I think
because
Bob
you found that
Ryle,
money and handed it in.
I think that Bob Ryle had influence somewhere, because I became a ministerial appointee. I had the same conditions as a public servant, but I wasn't a public servant. I was a ministerial appointee.
So it just goes to show, when you do the right thing, some good things can come about because of it. So, yeah. This episode is brought to you by my free 2-hour virtual masterclass, Ignite Your Warrior Within. I developed this masterclass based on my own life experiences with surviving a lifequake, which is traumatic workplace-related events that I've been experiencing starting in late 2021. If you want to learn tools to improve your mindset and your life and to ignite your warrior within to become unstoppable, then sign up for the next class at my website, donnasbalconyviews.com.au/masterclasses. So that's donnasbalconyviews.com.au/masterclasses. It would be absolutely awesome to see you there to ignite your warrior within. Laurie, I think we could really talk for hours and hours about, you've done so many jobs, even just in the Northwest, let alone in your whole long life. But one story that I really love as well, and I know a lot of other people have been interested in it when they've heard it, is about the cyclone.
Oh, right.
When you were 21, I think, was in 1956 in Broome. So do you want to talk us through what happened there?
Well, before I got the taxi, I was a barman in the Roebuck Bay Hotel, and my lady, whom I hadn't married then, but my girlfriend, I suppose you call her.
Your sweetheart at the time.
My sweetheart at the time. She lived in Sheba Lane, which was alongside Kennedy's store. And Kennedy's store is just around the corner from the Roebuck Hotel on top of a sandhill, raised above the general level of Broome. And then there was a police station across the road, and then another house where my girlfriend actually worked as the housemaid at the time. And we knew the cyclone was coming, and the pub was closed. They closed the pub. So I went up to my girlfriend's house because it actually got blown down in the cyclone. But and we knew that would possibly happen. So we went to the manageress's house next door to Kennedy's, and we stayed there. And while the cyclone was ripping through the town, I noticed one of the guys whom I knew, just can't think of his name at the moment, staggering across towards the police station. And I said, Adrian, his name was. I said, hey, where are you going, Adrian? Oh, he said, they're all dead. They're all dead. The house has fallen on them. And I knew where he lived. It was a 2-storied house further up the hill, the other side of Kennedy's store. So I raced out and around to where he lived.
This was during the cyclone, wasn't it?
During the cyclone, but you could still, there was sheets of iron and stuff flying around. And and what had happened, the houses there were built on concrete stumps about this high. And
about a metre high. Yep.
Well, a bit lower than a metre. Mm-hmm. And the cyclone had lifted the 2-storied house up off these stumps and dropped it back down again. And of course, it didn't drop exactly on the stumps. And these people had, because they were afraid their house might get blown down, they'd actually gone underneath it. And the house came down on top of them.
Gosh.
And there was about I can't remember exactly. There was 4 or 5 people, and one lady was pregnant. And I went next door to a Japanese. The Japanese were back in Broome then. They came in 1956. And I banged on the door, and they came out and helped out. I pointed. I couldn't speak their language, but I pointed, and they came out with me, and we got a long pole and managed to lever it up. And digging the sand away, and we pulled the bodies out, and this pregnant lady died later, but they managed to save her baby.
Oh, wow. Goodness.
She was almost due for delivery. Another
incredible.
person, I'm not sure if 2 people died or not. I think another person died. I can't remember now.
That was an Aboriginal family, wasn't it?
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then what happened decades later?
50 years later, almost to the day, I had to go. We were working in Essex Street
In Fremantle.
Marine House.
In Fremantle.
Yes, and I had to go in and see the legal people in Perth, and it was what was it, a Friday we used to have? Thursday. We used to have a luncheon with a glass of wine, and then go back to the office. And,
now you're telling tales, Laurence.
well, it wasn't really tales. Those
Back in
days
the
it was
day.
an accepted thing.
Those were the days. eh?
Those were the days, yes.
Anyway, I distract you from your story.
No, not at all. And I was late getting back, so everyone else had their lunch and gone back to work, and so I sat down in there and I ordered whatever it was, and as I was sitting there eating, I noticed a group of Aborigines come in, and one of them was in a wheelchair, and they were looking for a place to park the wheelchair and still all sit in the same place without blocking the thoroughfares. So I could see that there wasn't anywhere unless I moved. And I said, would you like to sit at this table and I'll move over there? And they said, oh, thank you very much. And, and they all sat down and I carried on eating. And I saw them go up and order their food. And I thought, wow, they're ordering roti prata. That's a very hot Malaysian dish. And I thought, that's not right for Aborigines to eat. They must come from Broome. That's where they would get that sort of food. So as I was leaving... So
you've got your curiosity's really peaked now, isn't it?
Yes, and as I was leaving, I had to go past the table, and I said I couldn't help but notice that you ordered roti prata. I said, are you from Broome? And they looked up and said, yes. And I said, I worked in Broome. I was in Broome, for 12 years in total. And I said, what's your name? And this fellow said, I can't remember his Christian name, but he said, Joe Portolano. I said, I knew your dad, Alf Portolano. He was a plumber. And he said, that's not my dad, that was my granddad. and I mentioned about the cyclone. And as I was talking about it to this guy, the woman who was, he was on the other side of the table, and the woman next to me stood up and put her hand on my shoulder, and she said, I was that baby.
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
She said, I was that baby, and it was 50 years to the day.
What? That's extraordinary, Laurence.
Yeah. And I went, and I got her contact details and she wanted my name and everything, and she was going back to Broome a few days' time or something, but she kept in contact with me and sent me copies of the newspapers of the that event.
Wow, so it's incredible. So you actually helped save her
And
life.
she brought her two sons down to meet me. They worked in the iron ore fields out of Port Hedland as machine operators, and she made a point of them coming down to meet me. And
What was that like for you, Laurence, to just...
it was incredible. When she put her hand on my shoulder and said, "I was that baby."
I can feel
Amazing.
the emotion in that. That's really a remarkable story.
And you could have easily had that situation but not actually gone and spoken to them, and you never would have known.
No.
So it was all quite incredible, wasn't
It
it?
was just by observing what they ordered.
Yes.
That's what
yes.
prompted me to. They must be from Broome, so I'll just see what their name is, see if I know any.
But it's also that real sort of, it shows you really need that local knowledge to sometimes be able to notice the connections that you have.
Oh, yes.
And,
I mean,
and
Aborigines anywhere else wouldn't be ordering roti prata.
yeah, but I mean, Aboriginal folk maybe, you wouldn't have the opportunity for that conversation unless you had lived alongside them and also lived in the same area and had that connection. Yeah. Extraordinary story.
It was. And when I went back to the office, I mentioned it to Bill Andrews. And he's a gunman on computers and things, and he researched the date and everything. Those days they didn't name cyclones; they were given a number.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, and he pulled up the number and the date, but the date was one day out.
Ah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. I've not met you before, Laurence, but your memory is extraordinary. Like names and places, I mean, sharp as a tack.
Oh well, I'm not old yet.
Laurence, our podcast is obviously about stories of courage, and that's a massive story of courage. But when you look back on your life today, what's been something that you think of as being courageous? Because, that might mean different things to different people.
Well, I don't think I'm very courageous at all. I like adventure. I've my whole life's been an adventure, and it still is. Yeah, I don't think I'm anything special at all.
It's certainly very, very interesting, though, hearing all the history and the stories and just what it was like up in the northwest back in those
I've got
days.
hundreds of stories. Some of them I couldn't tell.
On it.
The Life According to Laurence Brown. We could do a whole series, Donna.
This is the G-rated version of Laurie's, some of Laurie's stories. But Laurie, at the moment you're living in Adelaide, and I know you love painting. You've taken up painting quite
Not painting. I drawing, and I use Conti crayons and pastel crayons. I don't paint.
And you're very. You do a lot of still lifes, and they're very, very, very talented. I've seen quite a few of them.
I actually went on a art history retreat when I was back in Scotland recently, and the lecturer who was saying was actually pastels and is one of the hardest mediums. So it's very underrated in terms of the skill that it takes. So
I'm a self-taught artist, and I find it, pastels and Conti crayons and charcoal, compressed charcoal and things.
Well, maybe we can share one of them with our listeners if you'd be open to that, Laurie, sometime. Now I'll put you on the spot.
So Laurie was also very famous back in the day for he used to rollerblade around Fremantle, and he was quite well known for that. He was actually on the front page of the local paper, and even at Christmas time he used to wear a Father Christmas outfit with his rollerblades. So,
well, Martin Baird told me a story, and he brought it up today at lunch. I had a lunch today with some of my old workmates, and Martin Baird says, I remember the time I was in Canada. He and his wife were in Canada, and we were ordering a meal in a restaurant, and the people in the next table said, "Oh, you're Australian, are you?" They had overheard him speaking. And he said, "Yes, Oh, they said, well, we were in Fremantle once and we stayed in the Esplanade Hotel, and it was Christmas time, and we saw this guy on rollerblades and a Christmas and a bag of presents on his back, or rollerblading down the street.
So you're world famous.
Well, we could pull out one of those photos for the archives as well.
Yeah, well, I think there's going to be a few more people listening to your stories because, this podcast goes all around the world now. So, yeah, but it's been absolutely fantastic, Laurie. Is there any parting words you'd like to leave anyone with about living life to the full or adventure or anything like that? Or
be straight as a die and enjoy life.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a great way to live.
Thank you so much, Laurie, for coming in today. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And I might try and find out if that really is a tartan, that jacket. I know you've got me intrigued now. I'll have to do some research.
There's some similar, but not the same.
Not the same. Well, there you go.
So you better have to take a close-up photo.
I will, yeah. Yeah, great to have you in today, Laurence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Laurie.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening today. We really appreciate you, our listeners. Please like and follow us and share in whatever medium you're on. That really supports us. But we also would love to hear from you if you have a guest that you think would love to share their story. We'd love to do that so that we can get even more stories of courage and resilience out into the world. Well, there's obviously so many stories Laurie could have shared with us, Donna, and, I loved what came through for me actually was that respect and, attention and curiosity that he had working in rural areas, but also for Aboriginal people, and, the story about pulling a woman out of, after the cyclone. And I know maybe, I felt a little bit of discomfort maybe with the term Aborigine, but Laurence has got such a deep respect for Aboriginal people, and then to have met, I actually felt very emotional when he was telling us that story, and the hand on the shoulder, and it was very moving.
Oh, absolutely. When he told us on that day what had happened, it was really amazing. That was when I first thought it'd be great to have him on the podcast at some stage to share that story and some of the other things. It was a real kind of frontier place, the Northwest, especially in the 50s and the 60s, and lots of people, especially in Broome, from different cultures and different backgrounds. And so I'm really pleased that it gives people a little bit of a sense of what it was like. Yeah,
and because Laurie's got such an incredible memory, it's like an oral history. It's an archive, isn't it? The parts of his story to have such a sharp memory of all those years ago and what was happening, and the deep exploitation actually of people involved in the industries.
Yeah, so when he told me earlier about this story about why they wanted him to leave town, that was also quite confronting. But it's a part of the history that we have.
Yeah, it was such a pleasure to have him on.
Absolutely.